Pronto. Bom dia a todas e a todos. Está começando nossa aula, nosso encontro síncrono do dia 28 de maio de 2021. E vamos continuar assistindo aqueles documentários apresentados por Richard Dawkins, certo? E nós, como eu estava falando agora para vocês, esses documentários representam muito do debate ainda atual, ainda se perde tempo nisso, entre o literalismo bíblico, não é criacionismo mesmo, o que chamo de criacionismo é mais um literalismo bíblico versus teoria da evolução, ou darwinismo materialista, darwinismo ateísta, porque, como Richard Dawkins é um ateísta militante, não é nem declarado mesmo, ele é militante do posicionamento dele como ateísta. É melhor chamar de ateísta do que de ateu, certo? Então, é uma discussão que não se concilia. São dois posicionamentos que não tem como chegar a um consenso. A conciliação seria um meio termo, o consenso, a partir de uma relação dialética. O meio termo a gente consegue um debate científico quando tem teorias que têm pontos em conflitos, aí pode chegar a um meio termo, porque aqueles participantes daquele debate, aceitam coisas em comum. Mas, nesse caso, não existe pontos em comum. Nós simplesmente não tem pontos em comum entre eles. Para um ceder alguma coisa, outro ceder outra, e chegar a um consenso. Não existe. E simplesmente não existe. Então, como falei para vocês, no artigo de Nélio Biso, ele fala que são pontos de vista, são posições inconciliáveis, porque é o ateísmo bíblico, perdão, eu me distraí agora, é o darwinista, ateísta, materialista, versus o criacionismo que é literalismo bíblico. A Bíblia ao pé da letra. Aí não tem como conciliar. Certo? Aí não tem como conciliar. Estou gravando, vou começar, certo? Eu vou fazer o seguinte, de novo, para quem tiver algum problema com a minha conexão, porque ao compartilhar guias pelo YouTube, pode existem alguns probleminhas. Já ouvi falar de algum problema, porque realmente eu já compartilhei, mas nunca participei de alguma reunião, alguma coisa que tivessem compartilhado para mim. Porque pode haver diferença entre as internets, né? Entre as conexões. Então, são aí os três. Voltar aqui para o primeiro. Para o primeiro. Esse documentário também nunca vi na forma de DVD. Aquele de Galileu, eu tenho um DVD que eu comprei em banca de revista em 2009. Certo? Vamos lá, compartilhar, apresentar uma guia. Aqui, Deus, um delírio, vírus da fé. Na realidade, são dois, né? É um documentário em duas partes.
What he must have meant was that I talked about evolution. He thought I was saying that his flock were animals, which of course in a sense I was, because all humans are animals.
Haggard's approach is to say, let's teach evolution as just another theory alongside the Bible's creation story, also called intelligent design, which claims God helped evolution along. It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? But of course, it's nothing of the sort. These are not equal theories. Evolution by natural selection is supported by mountains of evidence, while creation contradicts the evidence and is only backed by some ancient scribblings. With Haggard and his followers on their doorstep, the rational atheist minority here feel so browbeaten that they've organized themselves into what they call a free thinkers group, which meets furtively, perhaps to fantasize about moving to Canada.
How nice to meet you.
Oh, Richard, it's wonderful. Welcome, welcome. It's so
Nice. Do freethinkers in America feel pretty beleaguered at the moment?
I've had my fair share of vitriolic letters and messages from parents saying that I'm Satan's incarnate for teaching evolution. And there are ministries here in Colorado Springs that indoctrinate students in summer programs to challenge biologists, biology teachers in the classroom. And
so is it organized campaign to
Oh, they're
biology
organized
teachers?
campaigns, absolutely. I do not tolerate it because I teach.
But they have this mindset that they are right.
If a person comes out in this country as an atheist, they're likely to suffer career damage. They might lose a job. They might not get a job. They might lose an opportunity for an apartment.
Waking up, as most Americans do, very late on this, coming to a realization, as we did during the McCarthy era, and even during...
It's very similar to the McCarthy
era.
era.
Yes,
it is.
Yeah.
And we do begin now to see the dangers of this extremism.
Christian fascism, isn't
Yeah,
it?
and whatever mantle you want to give it, which I've heard lately is domination theology, dominion Christianity.
How many Christians would be left? The person who's ever become a Christian has gone through the same thing here.
No, was that God forgives them and loves them. And
In a Christian, I had a hard time.
Fundamentalist American Christianity is attacking science. But what is it offering instead? A mirror image of Islamic extremism, an American Taliban. We live in a time of lethal polarization, when the great religions are pushing their conflict to a point where it is difficult to see how they can ever be reconciled. In New York, Madrid, and London, we've witnessed the religious insanities of the Middle East penetrate the heart of the secular West.
This morning, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people.
To understand the likes of Osama bin Laden, you have to realize that the religious terrorism they inspire is the logical outcome of deeply held faith. Even so-called moderate believers are part of the same religious fabric. They encourage unreason as a positive virtue.
And punish those responsible.
What's really scary is that religious warriors think of what they are doing as the ultimate good. Those of us brought up in Christianity can soon get the message. Onward, Christian soldiers, fight the good fight. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. But as far as I'm concerned, the war between good and evil is really just the war between two evils.
This is the Holy Land, where the terrible certainties of faith began and still rage. I've come here because it's a microcosm of the religious conflicts which threaten rational values and civilization. The dreadful combination of politics and extreme faith has caused the death of almost 4,000 people here in shootings, suicide bombings, and reprisals in the last 5 years. Despite the troubles, tourists still flock to Jerusalem, to places that their particular brand of religion taught them to revere as a child. The Via Dolorosa, where Jesus was allegedly whipped and beaten during the last hours of his life. Or the Muslim Dome of the Rock. Or the Western Wall, Judaism's and the world's most holy ruin.
Very special church because the church here is,
On the surface it looks like a place of harmless myth.
because here is the hill of Calvary where Jesus was crucified and the tomb of Jesus. Here what we are facing to the stone of anointment where the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross. So this is the slab where Christ's body was anointed with oil.
How do we know that? Is there any evidence that it was here?
You see, this is by telling from person to person.
It's tradition.
Traditional
yes.
from generation to the next.
Yeah.
We can see the hole where the cross was stood, where they're putting the cross inside the hole, and this is the place where the place of the crucifixion and where Jesus died on the cross.
You don't really believe that, do you?
This is the Christians, I explained to you that they believe this is the place where the crucifixion took place. And if we come closer to here to my side, please, thank you. The guard of the tomb is a Greek priest, regarding the tomb of Jesus. This is left from the big part of the stone which closed the tomb. What we call it the rolling or angels. Watch your head, please. Thank you very much. This is where you laid and rose from death. We call it sepulchre, means empty tomb. God bless you. You can touching the tomb. You can make your prayer.
Please, I get 4 days off. You come tomorrow, you leave, no Thursday. Forget it.
This holy city has to be one of the least enlightened places in the world. And it is also a place of barely suppressed religious hatreds.
There will come the day, and that day is now, when you're on our lands spreading these ideas that the soldiers of Allah will not put up with this.
We live at a time when religious belief is fighting back against reason and scientific truth. This is a problem for all of us, because religion's irrational roots nourish intolerance to the point of murder. I'm in Jerusalem's old city, trying to understand the role deeply held faith plays in the bitter conflict here. One of the first things you notice is the edgy watchfulness. The different ethnic and religious communities live cheek by jowl, but there are security checkpoints throughout the old city, and one section, above all, is under heavy guard. For the Muslims, the compound enclosing the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque is, after Mecca and Medina, the third holiest site in Islam. It was from here, they believe, that the Prophet Muhammad flew up to heaven. As bad luck would have it, the Jews believe the same place is the site of the long-destroyed First and Second Temples, the holiest shrine in Judaism. Jews are not allowed to worship inside the compound. Their prayers are restricted to the ruined Western or Wailing Wall.
When Jesus came here to overturn the tables, there was no mosque in view. When the Arabs conquered this part of the world, they established the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then they put over where we think is the main temple compound, where the altar was, where the Holy of Holies was, they put another building called the Dome of the Rock, which is not properly a mosque. And we, at the present moment, are simply not allowed in there inside the compound, identifiably as Jews.
The Muslims reject these Jewish claims. And when Ariel Sharon entered the Temple Mount area in the year 2000,
I came here with a message of peace.
his visit sparked the second, or Al-Aqsa, Intifada, a Palestinian uprising that has cost 4,000 lives so far.
وإذا أراد اليهود السلام مع العرب والمسلمين وفلسطين فليبتعدوا عن المسجد الأقصى المبارك.
And if the Jews sincerely want peace with the Arabs and the Muslims, then they should stand away, keep away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
In the Muslim religion, there is no possibility anyway of sharing the territory. If I come in there in some far corner, far away from a mosque, in an open area under a tree somewhere, if a Muslim will catch me murmuring psalms or some other prayer, he will call the police to have me egressed, shall I say.
As far as the Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered, there are no negotiations, absolutely no negotiations about it.
لأنه لا يملك أحد من المسلمين في العالم أن يتفاوض على الأقصى.
Because no Muslim has the right worldwide to negotiate over the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Again and again, my conversations come back to the solid walls that religion puts up, back to implacable faiths. My holy book is true, I am right, he is wrong. So I went to meet someone who, in my naivety, I thought might be able to see both sides of the story. Youssef Al-Khattab used to be called Joseph Cohen, born and brought up as a secular Jew in New York. In 1998, he moved to Gaza as a Jewish settler. But there he discovered a different God, Allah.
What I noticed coming to this center of world religions, what a lot of hatred religion fosters. I mean, I'm an atheist, and I'm rather gentle. I don't hate people, but it seems to me that I'm hearing hate on all sides, and it seems to me all to do with religion.
I hate atheists because atheists don't care if somebody fornicates in the middle of the street. They don't care if their women go bouncing around on TV topless. It makes no difference to them. They don't believe in anything. If you don't believe in a set rule, and you believe that a constitution can change, and you can amend the rules as they go along, and you don't believe in God's rule, then what law do you have? You just have man-made laws.
I realized I was in the company of someone who has willingly bought into fundamentalist dogma.
Is the basis of morality. What do you think about the September the 11th attacks on New York and the July the 7th attacks on London?
Okay, since you like to speak about evolution, I like to start before. What do you think about the Jews that have destroyed over 417 Arab villages, including all mosques and masjids, which wouldn't affect you because you're an atheist? So what are you saying, that we should sit back and say, oh, you know what? Let us progress and let us sit down and drink tea and talk about what to do? I think that's the most ridiculous thing. All I could say is, if there was no quote-unquote state of Israel, there would have been no September 11th.
But if we've all got to live together, it's not going to be helped if there are people of very, very strong faith who simply know they're right and are not amenable to argument, because there's somebody out there who's just as faithful as you and has his faith just as strong as yours, which is opposite to yours.
You see, the problem is, Richard, I think that you have fear. You know that this party of occupying Muslim lands and polluting society with these evil ideas that are around, it's not going to last forever. There will always be the soldiers of Allah there to give the response to this. So we also want the same thing. All we want is that we want the non-Muslims at this point off the lands of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All the lands of Muhammad, we want the kuffar out of it.
Do you want Islam to take over the rest of the world?
Of course I want it to, and it will. So my advice is to clean up your show at home, take your forces off our lands, correct yourselves, fix your society, all right? Fix your women.
Fix your women, that's not my business, that's my women's business.
No, it is your business. It is your business. When you take the women and dress them like whores on the street.
I don't dress women, they dress themselves.
No, but you allow it as a norm to let the women go on the street dressed like this. What's going on with your society?
But I'm interested in religion and the effect that it has on people's minds, and I'm worried about
And we're very worried about you. What's going on with the stealing, with the theft? It's out of control.
Clearly, historic injustice towards the Palestinians breeds hatred and anger. But we must face up to the fact that in creating the death cults of suicide bombers, it's unshakable, unreasonable conviction in your own righteous faith that is the key. If preachers then tell the faithful that paradise after martyrdom is better than existence here in the real world, it's hardly surprising that some crazed followers will actually swallow it, leading to a terrible cycle of vendetta, war, and suffering.
Well, I'm here on the Mount of Olives, looking out over this beautiful old city. We've heard some pretty extreme statements, some hatred, some bigotry, such as I haven't really heard before. I don't see what future the world has as long as people think like that, and people are going to go on thinking like that, as long as they're brought up from childhood, from the cradle, to think that there's something good about faith, to think that there's something good about believing because you've been told to believe, rather than believing because you've looked at the evidence.
I want to say that killing for God is not only hideous murder, it is also utterly ridiculous. Unlike religion, science doesn't pretend to know everything. There are still deep questions about the origins of the universe that have yet to be explained. But just because science can't answer them right now doesn't mean faith, tradition, revelation, or an ancient holy text can. Science can't disprove the existence of God, but that does not mean that God exists. There are a million things we can't disprove. The philosopher Bertrand Russell had an analogy. Imagine there's a china teapot in orbit around the sun. You cannot disprove the existence of the teapot because it's too small to be spotted by our telescopes. Nobody but a lunatic would say, well, I'm prepared to believe in the teapot because I can't disprove it. Maybe we have to be technically and strictly agnostic, but in practice we are all teapot atheists. But now suppose that everybody in the society, the teachers, the tribal elders, all had faith in the teapot.
Stories of the teapot have been handed down for generations. It's part of the tradition of the society. There are holy books about the teapot. Then somebody who said they did not believe in the teapot might be regarded as eccentric or even mad.
There's an infinite number of things like celestial teapots that we can't disprove. There are fairies. There are unicorns. Hobgoblins. We can't disprove any of those, but we don't believe in them any more than nowadays we believe in Thor, Amun-Ra, or Aphrodite.
We are all atheists about most of the gods that societies have ever believed in. Some of us just go one god further.
How do we explain the mysteries of life? Science has steadily overturned old religious myths about how all this came to be. Yet those who adhere to Judaism, Christianity, or Islam still prefer to ignore reason and have faith in their forever unprovable, omniscient creator.
The devil not coming on the blood. The devil have called that person
person from under the wall. For example, when I became a Christian, I had a hard time obeying my parents. Seems.
I had thought science was rolling back religious belief, but I was wrong. Far from being beaten, militant faith is on the march all across the world, with terrifying consequences. As a scientist, I'm increasingly worried about how faith is undermining science. It's something we must resist, because irrational faith is feeding murderous intolerance throughout the world.
In this program, I want to examine two further problems with religion. I believe it can lead to a warped and inflexible morality, and I'm very concerned about the religious indoctrination of children.
I want to show how faith acts like a virus that attacks the young and infects generation after generation.
I believe in a lawgiver, a God right there, actually not behind it, right imminent here, right now.
I want to ask whether ancient mythology should be taught as truth in schools.
Professor Dawkins, I'm very impressed that you're the new Messiah, and I appreciate your desire to redeem the world.
It's time to question the abuse of childhood innocence with superstitious ideas of hellfire and damnation.
I would rather for them to understand that hell is a place that they absolutely do not want to go.
This one would have been a preacher. Now they'll never hear his voice.
And I want to show how the scriptural roots of the Judeo-Christian moral edifice are cruel and brutish.
Thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them.
What in the 21st century are we doing, venerating a book that contains such stuff?
Science weighs up evidence and advances. Religion is hidebound belief for belief's sake. It's bad for our children, and it's bad for you. There is something exceedingly odd about the idea of sectarian religious schools. If we hadn't got used to it over the centuries, we'd find it downright bizarre. Sectarian education has proved to be deeply damaging. It has left a terrible legacy. When you think about it, isn't it weird the way we automatically label a tiny child with its parents' religion?
These are Jewish children. In another part of Jerusalem, we've seen Muslim children. In Northern Ireland, we have Catholic children, Protestant children, all going to separate schools.
But what's so special about religion that it is allowed to label small children Catholic or Protestant, Jewish or Muslim? Nobody would categorize children by the political party their parents support, call them Tory or Labour children. We agree they're too young to know where they stand on questions of politics. So why is it not the same for where they stand on the cosmos and humanity's place in it?
In genetic evolution, a species divides into two, initially geographically. There's some initial separation between the two subspecies, and they divide away from each other genetically. There's no longer gene flow between them, and so they can become separate species. It's a divisive force.
Sectarian education acts in a similar way. Children are initially isolated from each other because of their parents' faith. Then their differences are constantly drilled into them, and they embark on opposing life trajectories. Such divisions are encouraged, not just in faraway Israel, but right on our doorstep, in Northern Ireland, for instance, or in London. In North London, the Hasidic Jewish community is the largest after Israel and New York. Here, religious division is taken to its extreme. These ultra-Orthodox Jews only marry within their sect, television is frowned upon, and of course children attend exclusive religious schools, cloistered away from external influences, which just might persuade them to look outside their community. I want to find out why these children are being segregated, and whether their culture allows them to open their minds to reality.
Hello? Hello.
Rabbi Gluck.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Richard Dawkins. How do you do?
Thanks, but fine. Nice to meet you. Please come in.
Good, thank you very much.
Rabbi Gluck is London-born and bred, but you wouldn't necessarily know it. His accent is a testament to the isolation of this religious sect. Why should children be victims of the particular tradition in which they happen to have been born, rather than choosing for themselves by being shown all the evidence that's available?
We are all, to a certain extent, affected by our surroundings. There's no such thing as a person living in a vacuum.
Indeed.
We're all affected by our parents, by our family.
Yes.
But at the same time, we have a choice to stay or otherwise. I think it's important for a minority to be able to have a space where it can express itself, where it can learn about itself.
Well, couldn't you preserve the customs, the traditions, the history, without somehow imposing upon the children views about the universe which modern science would say are simply false?
I would say impose upon a Jew anything. I would say that's something which is impossible. I think scientifically impossible. We believe that God created the world in 6 days. We know about evolution. Every single Jewish kid knows about evolution and has thought about it and has studied it and has looked at it and has thought, what's going on here?
How many of the children who come up through your system, your school system, end up believing in evolution?
I think that the majority don't believe in evolution. But at the same time, it isn't they don't believe because they don't know about it.
You realize they're being taught that the entire world began after what archaeologists would recognize as the agricultural revolution. I mean, these children are being brought up in a very distorted world indeed. I worry about children being victims of this kind of what I can only describe as miseducation.
I find the terms as distorted and miseducation rather disturbing. Judaism has its tradition. I think there are various scientists who have their tradition. It's still called the theory of evolution.
Well, it's called that, but that's in a very technical sense.
But still, it's called that, and it's not called the law of evolution.
Well, I will call it the fact of evolution.
You're a fundamentalist believer.
No, I'm not a fundamentalist believer. The age of the Earth, 5,000 years. I mean, that is, I'm sorry, Rabbi, that is ridiculous. Of course, Rabbi Gluck is right that it's important for us to learn about our own background. But what upsets me is that in pursuit of that, these innocent children are being saddled with demonstrable falsehoods. And this is not just a problem of the Jewish minority. There's pressure from an increasing number of faith schools of other religions to put scientific fact on a par with primitive creation myths. In science classes, why can't they simply teach science?
You say this is truth because it's based on evidence. That's
Well,
such a
no,
funny
you don't
answer.
exactly say that. You say we're struggling towards the truth, and as new evidence comes in, we refine it.
And in the
it
middle of
gets
that,
better.
Jesus says, I am truth.
We live in the shadow of a religiously inspired terror in an era when science has plainly shown religious superstitions to be false.
The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want.
And yet it's a strange anomaly that faith schools are increasing in number and influence in our education system, with active encouragement from Tony Blair's government. There are already 7,000 faith schools in Britain, but the government's trust reforms are encouraging many more. Over half the new city academies are expected to be sponsored by religious organizations.
My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, for whom the Lord loves Amen.
The most worrying development is a new wave of private evangelical schools that have adopted the American Baptist ACE curriculum, Accelerated Christian Education.
Have you been to one of these schools before? No. Okay.
Accelerated Christian Education slips religious superstitions back into science.
If you want to be rude, you would say it's program learning. If you want to be polite, it's individualized instruction. So really, each one is teaching themselves to a certain extent. Of course, that has to be modified with adult supervision and so on.
Right, see here, you need to find the page where the answer is and write the page number next to it. When you find the answer, you need to underline it. Okay?
I had a look at the curriculum booklet that they use for science, and it was very noticeable that God or Jesus did come on just about every page.
Yes, yeah. We don't have anything like religious instruction in the school because it is part of...
I can see you wouldn't need it.
No,
yes.
of course not. Absolutely.
In one section in the science thing, I was sort of taken aback because I suddenly started reading about Noah's Ark. And what's that got to do with a science lesson?
I suppose that depends on your opinion. It could have a lot. If you believe in the story, it could have a lot to do with science. But, I mean, the stuff that I was taught when I was a kid at school in science, now you would laugh at and say it was a myth, but that's what I was taught as
what were you taught?
Well, when I was taught, one of the things that they taught me at school that I've always remembered was that the moon came from the ocean here on Earth and was flung into space, and that's where it came from.
Yes. Well, what you should have been taught, I suppose, is that there is a strong current theory that that's what happened.
So what you're really trying to ask me is, do you think the Genesis story was true and that God created the world in 7 days? That's what you would really like to ask me, right? My answer to that is, I don't know. Having said that, do I think that if God wanted to do it in 7 days, he could? Yeah, I think he could.
You could do anything.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a sort of an academic question which actually I don't care about the answer very much, really.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Kind of, yes, it does make sense. It doesn't make sense to me because I do care about the answer.
Why?
Because I care about what's true, and
I care about what's true.
Yes.
Well, I find Christianity encompasses everything about life. Christianity is life, so it's about everything. It touches education, politics, care, social services, everything, you see.
Let me ask about another thing in the booklet, which was about AIDS and HIV. I think somewhere it talks about AIDS being wages of sin. Is that mixing health education with moralistic preaching?
I suppose the flip side of that is that if there is no God and there is no lawgiver, why does it matter what I do? Why is rape wrong? Why is paedophilia wrong? Why are any of these things wrong if there is no lawgiver?
You've just said a very revealing thing.
But if there's
Are you telling me that the only reason why you don't steal and rape and murder is that you're frightened of God?
I think that all people, if they think they can get away with something and there is no consequences, we actually tend to do that. I think that is the reality. Look at the world in which we live. That is the reality.
OK, well, I think we better leave it at that.
Okay.
Adrian Hawkes, I'm sure, is a well-meaning man. But why should he impose his personal version of reality on children? Not only are they encouraged to consider the weird claims of the Bible alongside scientific fact, they're also being indoctrinated into what an objective observer might see as a warped morality.
It's pretty wild on there, isn't it?
Let me explain why, when it comes to children, I think of religion as a dangerous virus. It's a virus which is transmitted partly through teachers and clergy, but also down the generations from parent to child to grandchild. Children are especially vulnerable to infection by the virus of religion. A child is genetically pre-programmed to accumulate knowledge from figures of authority.
Stand on the rope. That's it. Now. Hold on here, here, there, and here. Hold tight. Got it? Good. There you go.
The child brain, for very good Darwinian reasons, has to be set up in such a way that it believes what it's told by its elders. Because there just isn't time for the child to experiment with warnings like, don't go too near the cliff edge. or don't swim in the river, there are crocodiles. Any child who applied a scientific, skeptical, questioning attitude to that would be dead.
Okay.
No wonder the Jesuit said, "Give me the child for his first 7 years, and I'll give you the man."
3, go!
The child brain will automatically believe what it's told, even if what it's told is nonsense. And then when the child grows up, it will tend to pass on that same nonsense to its children.
And so many people think they got the truth, but they only got deceit. And the devil's greatest weapon was deception. He got us all.
And so religion goes on from generation to generation.
What are you going to be known as when you die? Sinner or winner? God wants you all to be winners and not to be sinners.
For many people, part of growing up is killing off the virus of faith with a good strong dose of rational thinking. But if an individual doesn't succeed in shaking it off, his mind is stuck in a permanent state of infancy, and there is a real danger that he will infect the next generation. I'm going to meet someone who has experienced religion as child abuse firsthand.
Jill Mitten.
Oh, hello.
I'm Richard Dawkins.
Hello, Richard.
How do you do?
Jill Mitten was brought up in a strict Christian sect. Today, she's a psychologist who rehabilitates young adults similarly scarred by their narrow religious upbringing.
They need to be allowed to hear different perspectives on things. They need to be allowed to investigate. They need to be allowed to develop their critical faculties so that they can take a number of different viewpoints and weigh them up and decide which one is for them. They need to find their own pathways, not be forced into a particular mould as a child. If I think back to my childhood, it's one that's kind of dominated by fear. And it was a fear of disapproval while in the present, but also of eternal damnation.
Do they get taught about hellfire and things like that?
Absolutely. And to a child, images of hellfire and gnashing of teeth are actually very real. They're not metaphorical at all.
Of course not.
No. If you bring a child up and discourage it from thinking freely and making choices freely, then that's still, to me, that is a form of mental abuse or psychological abuse.
Or if you tell a child that when it dies, it's going to roast forever in hell.
That is abusive, yes.
What do they tell you about it? I mean, what happens in hell?
It's strange, isn't it? After all this time, it still has the power to affect me when you ask me that question. Hell is a fearful place. It's complete rejection by God. It's complete judgment. There is real fire. There is real torment, real torture. And it goes on forever. So there is no respite from it.
It's deeply disturbing to think that there are believers out there who actively use the idea of hell for moral policing. In the United States, Christian obsession with sin has spawned a national craze for hell houses, morality plays come Halloween freak shows, in which the evangelical hobby horses of abortion and homosexuality are literally demonized.
Come on in. Chrissy, be still. This was your choice.
Good job, guys.
Pastor Keenan Roberts is rehearsing a new production of his Colorado-based Hell House, which he's written and staged for almost 15 years. He fervently believes that you have to scare people into being good.
The call upon my life as a pastor, as a minister, is to tell people what the book says. And what I and we and our church and hundreds of churches across this country and around the world are doing is we have found a very creative, effective tool that is getting people's attention to consider the message.
I believe it.
We want to leave an indelible impression upon their life that sin destroys. Every scene preaches the truth that either sin destroys or Jesus saves.
You weren't gonna hurt me! You're hurting me!
Chrissy, it's only a medical procedure.
No! No, I changed my mind!
It's just too bad I wasn't there the night you were born.
Good. If this is a rehearsal, think how horrific the full production must be.
I presume you have a cut-off age for the tour. I mean, no children below an age of... So, well, what is your cut-off age?
Well, over the years of having audiences and people go through this, we have come to the decision that the best age for young people is really at 12.
You see, killing babies is such a wonderful choice. It's so convenient.
Would it worry you if a child of 12 coming to see your performance had nightmares afterwards? Or would you like that?
I would like for their life to be changed, no matter what. I would rather for them to understand that hell is a place that they absolutely do not want to go. I would rather reach them with that message at 12 than to not reach them with that message and have them live a life of sin and to never find the Lord Jesus Christ.
Do you solemnly swear to never believe that you are normal and that God is responsible for making you this way?
In the case of homosexual marriage, what harm does that do? Why would you be so passionately against that?
They're living in sin.
That's your opinion, but it's nothing to do with you, is it? It's
not
their
my
decision.
opinion. It's not my opinion. I'm telling you what the Bible says.
It's the Bible's opinion, but these are two people who want to live together. Isn't it their own business? What right have you to interfere?
This woman and this woman, burning in a repulsive lust for one another, deceived by all of hell that they've been born gay, are joining their deeply confused lives in this nauseating matrimony.
1 Corinthians 6, God says.
1 Corinthians 6, God says, homosexuality equals sin, and sin
I want them to know homosexuality is sin.
But you believe it presumably on the basis of scriptural authority. You believe
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unapologetically.
Yes, unapologetically. But why are you so sure that's right? I mean, if you think about where the scriptures come from, I mean, who wrote them and when? And what makes you so confident they're right?
It's what I believe.
I know you'd like
but
why?
Faith. It is a faith issue with me. Why do you not believe it?
Because of evidence.
Hell House is the brash end of a much bigger problem with the way religious belief works. Taken to its extremes, as by American evangelists, the Bible is scanned for passages to justify right-wing views on abortion and family values. I'm about to meet a believer who uses the Word of God to fight against centuries of human progress.
I think execution for adultery is not rejected.
Not rejected by whom? By you?
No, by the New Testament
What
writers.
about you? Do you favor execution of adultery?
I think that's fair to say that that's still a proper punishment that the state ought to prosecute.
It's not so bad, surely, to believe in moral codes handed down to us from the good book. Doesn't the Bible give us a moral framework in which to live? Well, no. The holy texts are of dubious origin and veracity, and they're internally contradictory. And when we look closely, we find a system of morals which any civilized person today should surely find poisonous. The Old Testament is in every church and synagogue throughout the world and is the root of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
If your brother, the son of your father or of your mother, or your son or daughter, or the spouse whom you embrace tries to secretly seduce you, saying, "Let us go and serve other gods."
This is God's advice on what to do to a friend or family member who suggests you believe in another deity.
You must kill him. Your hand must strike the first blow in putting him to death. You must stone him to death, since he has tried to divert you from Yahweh, your God.
The God of the Old Testament has got to be the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, vindictive, unjust, unforgiving, racist, an ethnic cleanser urging his people on to acts of genocide.
If God doesn't set a good moral example, who does? Abraham, the founding father of all three great monotheistic religions? The man who would willingly make a burnt offering of his son Isaac? Maybe not. How about Moses, he of the tablets which said, "Thou shalt not kill"? Well, the same man, it says in the book of Numbers, was incensed by the Israelites' merciful restraint towards the conquered Midianite people. He gave orders to kill all male prisoners and older women.
But all the women, children, that have not known a man by lying with him,
Keep alive for yourselves. How is this story of Moses morally distinguishable from Hitler's rape of Poland or Saddam Hussein's massacre of the Kurds and the Marsh Arabs?
So let's leave Moses out of it. But there are lesser characters facing somewhat more everyday moral dilemmas. Maybe they provide a better role model. In the book of Judges, a priest was traveling with his wife in Gibeah. They spent the night in the house of an old man. But during supper, a mob came to demand that the host hand over his male guest.
So that we may know him.
Yes, in the biblical sense. Well, the old man replied,
"Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly. Behold, here is my daughter a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing."
So enjoy yourselves by raping and humiliating my daughter, but show a proper respect for my guest, who is, after all, male. Whatever else this strange story might mean, it surely tells us something about the status of women in this religious society.
Now, of course, nice Christians will be protesting. Everyone knows the Old Testament is deeply unpleasant. The New Testament of Jesus, they claim, undoes the damage and makes it all right. Yes, there's no doubt that from a moral point of view, Jesus is a huge improvement, because Jesus, or whoever wrote his lines, was not content to derive his ethics from the scriptures with which he'd been brought up. But then, it all goes wrong.
The heart of New Testament theology, invented after Jesus' death, is St. Paul's nasty sadomasochistic doctrine of atonement for original sin.
The idea is that God had himself incarnated as a man, Jesus, in order that he should be hideously tortured and executed to redeem all our sins. Not just the original sin of Adam and Eve, future sins as well, whether we decide to commit them or not.
If God wanted to forgive our sins, why not just forgive them? Who's God trying to impress? Presumably himself, since he is judge and jury, as well as execution victim.
To cap it all, according to scientific views of prehistory, Adam, the supposed perpetrator of the original sin, never existed in the first place. An awkward fact, which undermines the premise of Paul's whole tortuously nasty theory.
Oh, but of course, the story of Adam and Eve was only ever symbolic, wasn't it? Symbolic? So Jesus had himself tortured and executed for a symbolic sin by a non-existent individual. Nobody not brought up in the faith could reach any verdict other than barking mad.
The strange theology and questionable texts wouldn't matter but for the unfortunate fact that there are people out there who really believe this stuff is the Word of God and act on it, challenging progressive values and the rule of law. If you take the good book to its literal extreme, and some people do, you can justify murder. In 1994, the Reverend Paul Hill shot and killed Dr. John Britton outside his abortion clinic in Florida. In 2003, Hill was executed for murder. But he went to his death, claiming his actions were backed by Holy Scripture. I'm going to meet Paul Hill's friend and defender, the Reverend Michael Bray.
Mr. Bray?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Richard Dawkins.
Good to meet you, sir. Michael Bray.
On what moral basis can he, as a Christian, defend a self-professed cold-blooded killer?
Your friend, Paul Hill, who was convicted of murdering a doctor, he took the law into his own hands, didn't he?
No. Paul Hill, by his own testimony, acted defensively, not in retribution. That's the job of the law. The job of the law is to punish.
Yeah.
The job of citizens is indeed, out of love, to protect one another.
Does it ever occur to you that that doctor had a wife to grieve for him and Paul Hill killed him? Now, the embryos that Paul Hill was defending, they were tiny little things without any knowledge, without any memory, without any fears, without all the things that a full-grown adult doctor had.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that give your conscience a little bit of a twinge?
Well, I don't think we measure the value of someone by their cognizance of their surroundings or even their relationships. The value that we give human beings historically and thankfully from the scriptures is that they are created in God's image and they have a certain sanctity because of that. So whether they be imbeciles or...
To most sensible people, Bray's fellow clergyman Paul Hill looks like a dangerous psychopath, righting what he perceived as wrong by committing another, more terrible wrong. Yet people like Hill and Bray don't see the world that way. They declare that their justification is in the Bible, and by redeclaring the Bible as the absolute word of God, they give their actions validity.
Yeah. Many of us who don't subscribe to any particular holy book worry about suffering. We actually worry about whether the victim of a murder, whether it's a murder of in your terms, of an embryo or of an adult doctor. I mean, can you not see that there's a big imbalance there between those two deaths?
Well, I couldn't take into account, because I'm not omniscient, to know all the sufferings that various people suffer.
Where do you think he is, Paul Hill?
I have high hopes that he's doing well.
You think he's in heaven?
Yes.
You think Jesus approves of murdering doctors?
I think that he said that we're to love the children just as we love others. Suffer the little children to come to me.
I reckon I have a fairly strong moral conviction as well, but I'm not that confident. I wouldn't like to go and kill somebody for the sake of my morality. How can you be that confident?
I think my own confidence, I guess, has come with time. The more I think the scriptures, the more I live, the more satisfied I am intellectually that they interpret reality for me.
It was curious. I quite liked him. I thought he was sincere. I thought he wasn't really an evil person. And I was reminded of a quotation by the famous American physicist, Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist. Weinberg said, "Religion is an insult to human dignity. Without it, you'd have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, it takes religion."
People like Michael Bray are a big problem for Christian morality. Not all Christians are as rooted in the soil of Scripture, but they do all take inspiration from the same holy text. But who is right? The established Church of England is being painfully torn apart by these differences of opinion over the scriptures. The battleground is not so much abortion, but homosexuality and gay clergy. On one side are vociferous scriptural purists, on the other, more moderate believers who interpret the Bible selectively.
You're on the liberal wing of the Anglican Church. Maybe the other side are the ones who are being true to their scriptures in a way that you're not. I mean, you, who are liberal and much closer to what I would think, are the one who's departing from certainly from the scriptural and perhaps from the fundamentals.
Well, if you take the issue of homosexuality, there's no doubt about it. There are a number of texts, not as many as people think, but a few texts, which clearly regard homosexuality as wrong, both in the Old Testament very strongly, but they're also there in the New Testament. But, of course, it's a question of how you interpret the Bible, whether it's really right to just simply extract a few isolated texts rather than seeing the whole message of the Bible, the whole message of Jesus. But I think there's another, perhaps even more fundamental one, which links in to your fundamental interest in evolution. Our understanding of what it is to be a gay or lesbian now is very, very different from what it was, let us say, in the Roman world when the New Testament's written. They thought it was purely a matter of choice. We now actually know that a significant percentage of people are predominantly attracted to members of their own sex. So it's a question of the changing facts as well as a changing understanding of how the Bible should be interpreted.
This, of course, is all music to my ears, but I'm kind of left wondering why you stick with Christianity at all, therefore. And maybe some of the fundamentalists might say just that to you.
I think that moderates need to be passionate both about their religious beliefs and about rationality. And it's possible to be a passionate moderate. It's much more...
Some say that while religious fundamentalists betray reason, moderate believers betray reason and faith equally. The moderates' position seems to me to be fence-sitting. They half believe in the Bible, but how do they decide which parts to believe literally and which parts are just allegorical?
I take it that as an Anglican bishop, you wouldn't deny miracles, and I think you ought to be consistent with what you've just been saying.
I think if God was doing miracles the whole time, then we would live in an Alice in Wonderland type of world. It would be unpredictable, and you and I wouldn't be able to have a rational conversation.
Yeah. It's almost though you think there's a kind of ration of miracles which mustn't be exceeded, or we get into
we can't say what that ration is. If miracles were happening all the time, whenever we wanted them to happen, then human life as we know it couldn't exist.
And what about sort of really big miracles like the virgin birth? What do you think about that?
I don't think that it's on a par with the resurrection, for example. I mean, I actually do believe that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead is absolutely fundamental to Christianity in a way that I don't believe the virgin birth is.
It seems to me an odd proposition that we should adhere to some parts of the Bible story but not to others. After all, when it comes to important moral questions, by what standards do we cherry-pick the Bible? Why bother with the Bible at all if we have the ability to pick and choose from it what is right and what is wrong for today's society? I suspect that religion is simply a parasite on a much older moral sense. I want to examine how science reveals the true roots of human morality. Morality stems not from some fictional deity and his texts, but from altruistic genes that have been naturally selected in our evolutionary past.
Humans have much more sophisticated versions of the kinds of social instincts you see in chimps and other creatures. Really, there's no great leap. It's just, you can think of chimps as MS-DOS and humans as Windows 2000.
Religious believers like to claim that their God and ancient texts provide them with an inside track to defining what is good and what is bad. But it is surely far more moral to do good things for their own sake, rather than as a way of sucking up to God. Our true sense of right and wrong has nothing to do with religion. I believe there is kindness, charity, and generosity in human nature. and I think there is a Darwinian explanation for this. Through much of our prehistory, humans lived under conditions that favored altruistic genes. Gene survival depended on nurturing our family and on doing deals with our peers. The "I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine" principle.
I don't think we need a religion to explain morality, and if anything, it just gets in the way. Morality is a lot older than religion. Humans have an innate moral sense, or a range of moral senses that you can think of as sophisticated versions of the kind of social instincts you see in chimps and other social species.
What sort of morality or proto-morality would you expect to find in a chimpanzee troop?
We find that they live in family groups. The mothers look after their kids. They work in teams. And also, chimps are particularly good at competing for status through what's been called public service. So they compete for status not just through brute force, but by being good leaders, by intervening to settle disputes.
What are the main evolutionary reasons for cooperating and being altruistic?
Working together often produces mutual benefits for those that are involved. So you can often just do better by working in a team than you can by working by yourself.
Perhaps it is our genetic inheritance that explains why those of us with no allegiance to a holy book or a pope or an ayatollah to tell us what is good still manage to ground ourselves in a moral consensus which is surprisingly widely agreed. As social animals, we've worked out that we wouldn't want to live in a society where it was acceptable to rape, murder, or steal. We have a moral conscience and a mutual empathy, and it is constantly evolving. Religious or not, we have changed in unison and continue to change in our attitude to what is right and what is wrong.
50 years ago, just about everybody in Britain was somewhat racist. Now, only a few people are. 50 years ago, it was impossible for gay people to walk along the street hand in hand. Now it's easy.
Some of us lag behind the advancing wave of moral standards, and some of us are ahead. But all of us in the 21st century are ahead of our counterparts from the time of Abraham, Muhammad, or St. Paul. The progressive shift often emerges in opposition to religion. It's driven by improved education and then expressed by newspaper editorials, television soap operas, parliamentary speeches, judicial rulings, and novels.
I guess my starting point would be the brain is responsible for consciousness. And we could be reasonably sure that when that brain ceases to be, when it falls apart and decomposes, that'll be the end of us. From that, quite a lot of things follow. I think especially morally, we are the very privileged owners of a brief spark of consciousness. And we therefore have to take responsibility for it. You cannot rely, as Christians or Muslims do, on a world elsewhere, a paradise to which one can work towards and maybe make sacrifices, and crucially make sacrifices of other people. We have a marvelous gift, and you see it develop in children, this ability to become aware that other people have minds just like your own and feelings that are just as important as your own. And this gift of empathy seems to me to be the building block of our moral system.
I profoundly agree with you, and I've always felt that one of the things that's wrong with religion is that it teaches us to be satisfied with answers which are not really answers at all.
And if you have a sacred text that tells you how the world began or what the relationship is between this sky god and you, it does curtail your curiosity. It cuts off a source of wonder. The loveliness of the world in its wondrousness is not apparent to me in Islam or Christianity and all the other major religions.
To an atheist like Ian McEwan, there is no all-seeing, all-loving God who keeps us free from harm. But atheism is not a recipe for despair. I think the opposite. By disclaiming the idea of a next life, we can take more excitement in this one. The here and now is not something to be endured before eternal bliss or damnation. The here and now is all we have, an inspiration to make the most of it. So atheism is life-affirming in a way religion can never be. Look around you. Nature demands our attention, begs us to explore, to question. Religion can provide only facile, ultimately unsatisfying answers. Science, in constantly seeking real explanations, reveals the true majesty of our world in all its complexity. People sometimes say, there must be more than just this world, than just this life. But how much more do you want?
We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they're never going to be born. The number of people who could be here in my place outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. If you think about all the different ways in which our genes could be permuted, you and I are quite grotesquely lucky to be here. The number of events that had to happen in order for you to exist, in order for me to exist. We are privileged to be alive, and we should make the most of our time on this world.
Pronto. Oi, pessoal. Eu acabei deixando até o final mesmo. Deixei fluir o vídeo inteirinho. Não sei se os outros eu vou deixar, não. Mas, até porque a abordagem é um pouco diferente nos inimigos da razão. É uma abordagem meio diferente dele. Tá? Olha, tem alguns pontos, né, para se considerar. Eu não vou aqui fazer críticas nem nada, até porque é lógico que ele expõe extremos da religião. Na parte final, realmente, o documentário melhora um bocado. No começo, a parte final, que é do vírus da fé, melhora um bocado por trazer à tona algumas questões de evolução, etc., né? Esse ano, não, há pouquíssimo tempo, porque agora com a pandemia eu tenho procurado livros também para ler, para complementar, e li esse livro aqui, eu estou vendo aqui, A Evolução Improvável, de William von HarperCollins. Ver se dá para ver aqui. Ele é psicólogo. Eu vou falar um pouquinho mais quando a gente for ver a teoria da dupla herança, que isso aqui complementa um bocado. É um livro de abordagem evolucionista, né, justamente da evolução humana. E esse improvável, que fala dos eventos improváveis anteriores à espécie humana que geraram o Homo sapiens, como nós somos, né? Que nossos antepassados...
Hortência está perguntando se a nota do segundo laboratório já saiu.
Sim, o primeiro e segundo laboratório eu fiz uma nota só. O terceiro que vai para outra nota, certo? Eu ainda vou colocar outras coisas, que tem pouca coisa. Tanto é que o conteúdo desses laboratórios está muito defasado em relação ao que a gente está vendo, né? Eu acabei juntando o primeiro e o segundo como uma coisa só, tá? Fiz uma média. E eu fiz uma média. Então ainda tem mais coisa para colocar para vocês, porque a hora que vocês acabam estudando é para responder, né? Acabam estudando mesmo, certo? Vou colocar depois vou selecionar alguns eventos, isso complementa bem o que ele falou na parte final, sobre a questão da diferença entre chimpanzés e nós, e quando houve a separação e a série de eventos que fizeram essa divergência, que nós temos antepassado em comum com os chimpanzés 6, 7 milhões de anos atrás. Então, por exemplo, aqui nesse livro de Filosofia da Biologia, no capítulo... Ele tem modelo primatológico de cultura, o capítulo 11, e o último capítulo, 14, ética evolucionista, o enfoque adaptacionista da cooperação humana. É adaptacionista, não, mas que nem toda teoria da evolução segue o adaptacionismo mesmo de forma radical. Que isso, eu tenho aqui a apresentação aqui que eu deixei separada para vocês, sobre adaptacionismo, que é uma abordagem da teoria da evolução. Uma das. Certo? Inclusive, Richard Dawkins é um adaptacionista. Mas tem alguns autores que consideram essa abordagem limitante e limitada, reducionista, que o processo de evolução não é só por adaptação, tem outros fatores envolvidos. Seleção natural é consenso, mas seleção natural gerando adaptação é outra história. Que tudo que acontece tem uma vantagem adaptativa, por isso aquilo é seleção, é outra história. Quando a gente for falar eu complemento algumas coisas, quando a gente for falar de teoria da dupla herança e outras abordagens não reducionistas. Mas, nesse mesmo aqui, livro da Evolução Improvável, fala das circunstâncias do contexto a partir da divergência entre a gente e os chimpanzés, dos nossos antepassados, que levaram a uma seleção de indivíduos com capacidade de viver em sociedade muito mais refinada do que os chimpanzés. Os chimpanzés já são sociais, nossos antepassados, não nós, já eram muito mais sociais. E em algum momento surgiu a chamada teoria da mente, que é a nossa capacidade de nos colocarmos no lugar do outro, de nos imaginarmos no lugar do outro, que isso não é uma coisa mais ampla do que empatia. Empatia quando é questão emocional. A teoria da mente é a nossa capacidade de observar uma outra pessoa e imaginar o que ela está pensando, pelo comportamento dela. E uma criança muito pequenininha tem uma capacidade já de observação muito grande e de imitação. A partir da teoria da mente, a gente tem uma capacidade de imitação fidedigna muito refinada, muito maior do que qualquer outro primata. E tem uma série, nós somos muito diferentes dos outros símios. Essas divergências entre a gente e os símios acabou gerando muito grande, apesar do nosso, em termos de genes, a diferença ser pequena, mas existe uma série de monte de fatores. Então, nós temos teoria da mente, chamada teoria da mente, essa capacidade de nos colocar no lugar do outro e, por isso, de imitar. E vice-versa. Uma coisa, a imitação leva à teoria da mente e vice-versa. Não tem, é dialético isso. Não tem como separar uma coisa da outra. E isso permite, por exemplo, aprender a falar naturalmente. Ler e escrever, o letramento já não é natural. Por isso que a aprendizagem é outra história. Mas falar, a partir da imitação, é algo, parece que programado na gente, né? O potencial, a gente nasce com potencial cerebral para isso. Porque faz parte da teoria da mente e da capacidade de imitação fidedigna. E que os nossos filhotes, né, nossos nenéns, já têm uma capacidade de observação seletiva a outras pessoas muito grande. Desde recém-nascido, que isso já tem pesquisas em psicologia, que mostram, se você colocar aquela carinha, sabe, tipo emoji, aquela carinha de um círculo, 2 pontos como olhos, um tracinho como nariz, e um tracinho vertical e um tracinho horizontal como boca, colocar para um neném e colocar essa mesma figura com as coisas embaralhadas, ela vai preferir olhar de forma significativa a quantidade de vezes que ela vai olhar. Vai preferir olhar para a carinha, para a figurinha com 2 pontos no lugar dos olhos, tudo certinho, do que a embaralhada. Então, já é uma preferência já instintiva, isso já é inato. E o falar, a imitação, a capacidade de imitação, a nossa capacidade de teoria da mente já é inato. E, por isso, a empatia também é. Aqui, falando o seguinte, porque as religiões fazem acreditar, e muitos filósofos, etc., que nós somos instintivamente ruins, o que não é verdade. Se fôssemos instintivamente ruins, a gente não teria chegado onde chegou. Instintivamente, a gente tende a querer cooperar e a atuar em grupo. O ser humano é um animal social, instintivamente social.
Professor.
Oi.
O senhor pode ler o chat?
Ah, desculpa. Se tiver alguma... Eu não sei como é que está. Ah, certo, Amanda. Amanda, responde a frequência para mim agora, para eu liberar você. Porque eu acabo... Respondo logo a frequência, quem precisar, sabe, assiste depois na gravação. Certo? Certo. Realmente uma diferença desse documentário é que ele não se aprofunda em alguns pontos, já que é um documentário para grande público, né? Mas, como falando para vocês, os estudos atuais da evolução humana já explicam muita coisa sem apelar para a nossa... que a gente tem que ser dominado por ideias, como pelo medo de um castigo eterno. Nós já somos, pelo menos a maioria de nós, o que isso é observado em tribos. Quando a situação realmente tribal, o nosso grande problema da civilização é que nós convivemos com muita gente desconhecida, temos que conviver, né? E isso já não é uma condição natural. Nossa condição natural de tribo, etc., né, é a capacidade de cooperar em grupo, pelo menos em grupos pequenos, o grupo dos conhecidos, e por nossa capacidade por nós termos a teoria da mente. Outra coisa é que nós temos uma capacidade muito refinada de perceber o outro, e por isso saber em quem confiar e em quem não confiar. fazer aliança, fazer amizades. E é péssimo, realmente, a exclusão social é um castigo péssimo para quem não sabe cooperar. Ou seja, o ostracismo, como ele fala, o William von Rippel fala, isso deixou bem claro na origem, que no nosso antepassado, antes do Homo erectus, antes do gênero Homo, para sobreviver na savana, ser abandonado da família, pela família, ser deixado à própria sorte, por não ter se comportado direito, era sentença de morte. Então, a própria seleção natural ajudou também aí. É uma própria sentença de morte. Nós não somos capazes de sobreviver sozinhos. Os nossos antepassados não eram capazes de sobreviver sozinhos. Eles precisavam, quando começou a viver na savana, com bipedalismo, com os 2 pés, quando surgiu a Lucy, que é já o Australopithecus, Lucy, né? A caixa craniana dela era um pouquinho maior, ou equivalente a de um chimpanzé, a altura 1 metro e pouco. E já era bípede, usando as mãos, etc. Como é que eles se defendiam? E um corpo frágil, quase tão frágil quanto o nosso. Como é que se defendiam, conseguiam sobreviver na savana? Pela cooperação, em grupo. Eles aprenderam que era melhor se defender de um leão se juntando e jogando pedra, e espantando, do que fugindo, por exemplo. Né? Vários outros fatores. Ou seja, aprenderam a cooperar desde o princípio para poder sobreviver. Então, nós temos potencial, exceto uma pessoa ou outra, porque eu estou falando de empatia, de, a partir da teoria da mente, essa capacidade de gerar empatia. Vocês podem perguntar, não tem gente que é egoísta? Tem. Mas a questão do egoísmo não é instintivo. Muitas vezes é cultural. É ambiente cultural também. Ou questão de educação da pessoa ali. Que ela foi educada de um jeito a não favorecer a empatia dela. Ou não favorecer a atividade em grupo, porque nós temos um sistema social tão complexo que isso é possível. Que acaba sendo possível, dependendo de como aquela pessoa, o contexto dela, de como ela é educada pelos pais, pode gerar uma pessoa sem egoísta mesmo. Porque realmente em condições tribais, por exemplo, condições mais naturais, realmente não tem como dali que a criança, do jeito que ela é criada em conjunto com todos os membros mais velhos, do convívio que ela tem com outras crianças, etc. Não tem como ela desenvolver o egoísmo. Nossa educação é outra história, né? Mas de alguns pais, né, acabam criando gente egoísta. Fora isso, é lógico que tem gente com problema de gerar a teoria da mente, como os autistas, mas é minoria, né? Isso é uma exceção, minoria por causa da formação do cérebro daquelas pessoas. Olha, eu queria começar pelo menos agora por os inimigos da razão. Os inimigos da razão, vocês podem fazer crítica a ele. Eita, por cada hora. Eu só queria comentar o seguinte: o próprio Yuval Harari, israelense, ou seja, não é religioso, ele é ateu mesmo, ele se diz ateu e pronto. Como muitos judeus, ou muitos israelenses, ou muitos judeus israelense, que é diferente, né? Judeu por causa da origem familiar dele. Judaísmo é a religião. Israelense é a nacionalidade. Então, ele é judeu israelense. Ele nasceu em Israel. E tem muitos. E ele fala que a grande contribuição dos judeus para as ciências, como é Freud e muitos outros, ele mesmo, etc., eram de judeus ou ateus ou agnósticos, judeus seculares, judeus que se desligaram da ortodoxia da religião, e que os judeus ortodoxos são incompatíveis com o progresso científico. É uma minoria. É uma minoria que diz que incomoda na política de Israel. Tem uma minoria que acaba tendo muito poder e incomoda em alguns casos. Que é uma minoria que a grande contribuição dos judeus foram aqueles judeus centro-europeus totalmente integrados à cultura a cultura europeia. Vamos lá, eu vou começar o outro. Apresentar uma guia. Vai até as 10 mesmo, viu? Vou apresentar só até as 10 e pronto. Esse é parte. Parte 1, está aqui.
Science has sent orbiters to Neptune, eradicated smallpox, and created a supercomputer that can do 60 trillion calculations per second. Science frees us from superstition and dogma and enables us to base our knowledge on evidence. Well, most of us. Previously, I've explored how organized faith and primitive religious values blight our lives.
You take the women and dress them like whores on the street.
I don't dress women, they dress themselves.
But you allow it as a norm.
The fault line runs deeper even than religion. There are two ways of looking at the world, through faith and superstition, or through the rigors of logic, observation and evidence, through reason. Yet today, reason has a battle on its hands. I want to confront the epidemic of irrational, superstitious thinking.
Would you understand somebody on the spirit side with the name Charles? I believe that I give...
You really believe it?
I believe absolutely
Seriously,
100% that it's true, because it's been proven to me against my rationality.
It's a multi-million-pound industry that impoverishes our culture.
Astrology leans toward the divine and the sacred, words which I know you don't like very much.
And throws up New Age gurus who exhort us to run away from reality.
The tree-ness is the spiritual quality.
Or the rockness.
Or the rockness.
Yeah. As a scientist, I don't think our indulgence of irrational superstition is harmless. I believe it profoundly undermines civilization. Reason and a respect for evidence are the source of our progress, our safeguard against fundamentalists and those who profit from obscuring the truth.
We live in dangerous times when superstition is gaining ground and rational science is under attack. In this program, I want to take on the enemies of reason.
"300 years ago, in the Age of Enlightenment, scientists and philosophers from Galileo to David Hume had the courage to stand up for intellectual principles and reason. The rational science they pioneered has given us tangible benefits. Everything from antibiotics to electricity, sewage systems to sat-nav. And it's not just material progress. Increased life expectancy, health and leisure provided by modern medicine and industrial technology have given more people more time than ever before to educate themselves, express their creativity, and ponder existence. And yet, into this better world that reason has built, primitive darkness is coming back, a disturbing pick and mix of superstitions. Where better to start my journey than a New Age fair? Hello, what do you do? What sort of readings do you do?
All kinds. I do the tarot,
Yeah.
and then I also do the crystal ball. This is George.
Hello. What can you do for me?
All right, well, we can take your aura photograph.
All right, I'd like that, yes. What do I do? Just sit on the throne there?
Take a seat, please.
Shall I take my glasses off? What have we got here?
Right, now, you have got a couple of spirit guides around you at the moment, because I think there's something in your life changing, but I think this is about you as well, being more comfortable with yourself. Now, what you have here is you have somebody in spirit who's really, really close to you, and they've got their arms around your neck.
Oh, that's very nice to know. All these people reap the rewards of science and reason, but many here revel in a foggy suspicion of scientific thinking. Okay, so you could teach me how to use my psychic energy.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yes, you can rely much better on that than on your head.
Irrationality is woven into the fabric of modern life. We unthinkingly indulge unscientific delusion.
I'm the rather schizophrenic Gemini.
Aquarius.
Pisces.
Astrology is so pervasive that just about everyone has been indoctrinated with the alleged character of their star sign.
They're fiery, a bit unreliable, they love traveling, they're very expansive, they're quite spiritual.
Loyal, spend too much money, good leader.
They can be a bit moody, swinging one way and the other. They can be very bubbly 1 minute and then a bit down, and you never know what you're going to get with them, my husband says.
A full quarter of the British population claim to believe in astrology. That's more than believe in any one of the gods touted by religions. Day in, day out, astrological horoscopes get far more newspaper column inches than science. Amusingly, it falls foul of our modern taboo against lazy stereotyping. How would we react if a newspaper published a daily column that read something like this? Germans, it is in your nature to be hard-working and methodical, which should serve you well at work today. In your personal relationships, especially this evening, you will need to curb your natural tendency to obey orders. Chinese, inscrutability has many advantages, but it may be your undoing today. British, your stiff upper lip may serve you well in business dealings, but try to relax and let yourself go in your social life. And so on through 12 national stereotypes. Of course, the astrology columns are not as offensive as that, but we should ask ourselves exactly where the difference lies. Both are guilty of facile discrimination, dividing humanity up into exclusive groups based on no evidence. So now I want to find out how those who trade in such irrational nonsense can possibly justify what they do.
This is a map of the cosmos with London in the very center.
I always thought that by the 21st century, science and reason would have long since cleaned up. And yet every day of the week, we're encouraged to retreat into the fog of the superstitious past. Astrology is a primitive belief system made into elaborate pseudoscience. It arrogantly makes humans the focal point of the universe. The movement of planets is supposed to signify petty developments in our career or love life. It was developed in the 2nd century AD by the philosopher Claudius Ptolemy and has not moved on since, despite the discovery of new planets and despite a shift in the Earth's rotational axis that has thrown Ptolemy's zodiac out by 23 degrees.
You could ask a question. You could say, who has stolen my money?
It never made sense when it was first invented, and it makes even less sense now.
Read it off as though you mean they get it right. Do you think there's an actual physical influence of the planets that somehow beams down and influences us, people?
I think it's very hard to see that. I think if you try to understand astrology as a causal agent,
right,
I think that's hard to imagine how that would happen. I think you have to look at the planets as signifiers. When you look at the movement of Saturn around the zodiac, it's a very strong signifier of what's going on in individual lives.
I don't even understand how they could possibly be signifiers. I mean, how could the rise of Saturn possibly be a signifier for something that's going on physiologically in a person's body? The position of planets in the signs of the zodiac.
This is what you keep coming back to ask me. How could it possibly work?
Yes.
And I've told you, I don't know. It's a deep, dark mystery.
What isn't a deep, dark mystery is why the trite vagaries of newspaper horoscopes seem to chime with readers. Psychologists have identified what's known as the Barnum effect, whereby people tend to believe statements are accurate for them personally, when in fact they're general enough to apply to anyone.
We could devise a little experiment where we take your forecasts and then give some of them straight, give some of them randomized, sometimes give Virgo, the Pisces forecast, etc., and then ask people how accurate they were.
Yes, that would be a perverse thing to do, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes, but I mean, wouldn't that be a good test?
A test of what?
Well, how accurate you are.
I think that your intention there is mischief, and I think what you'd then get back was mischief.
Okay, well, my intention would not be mischief. My intention would be experimental test.
Okay.
Scientific test. Well, but even if it was mischief, how could that possibly influence it?
I think it does influence it. I think whenever you do things with astrology, intentions are strong.
I'd have thought you'd be eager. I mean, I'd have thought you'd really... See, the fact that you're not makes me think you don't really, in your heart of hearts, believe it. I don't think you really are prepared to put your reputation on the line.
I just don't believe in the experiment, Richard. It's that simple.
Well, you're in a kind of no-lose situation then, aren't you? Because,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Regardless of Neil Spencer's concerns, I wanted to conduct a simple trial. We selected 20 people at random. We asked them to read that week's horoscope for Capricorn, but as a test, we said it applied to their own star sign.
Not only do you have clever Mercury and ambitious Mars focusing on success,
but now the Sun is at the same pivotal midhaven angle of your solar chart.
I have no idea what that means.
Put simply, this means that this is your moment to go that extra mile to become the person you dream of becoming.
Remember, however, that there will be others who want what you have and will stop at nothing to get it.
Astrologers say this should fit just Capricorn and not the rest. But what actually happened?
Yeah, maybe. To be honest, I felt there's some Mercury energy this week because there's a lot of arguments around and a lot of bad vibes. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. What a Ledwell joke.
Could apply to me as much as to the next person.
Yeah, well, in a way, yeah. I am. I'm going on a flamenco course in Spain.
That isn't necessarily pertaining to me this week. It's pertaining to me generally.
Kind of rubbish.
The same number of people agreed that the horoscope was accurate for them as disagreed, and similar results are found with proper large-scale experiments. Technically, all but one of our group should have disagreed, namely our only Capricorn.
Does it apply to you?
Not at this moment, no.
Am I taking this too seriously? I believe astrology misleads the public, denies scientific progress, and belittles our universe. There's a far richer way of looking at the cosmos. Astronomy is a triumph of the human intellect, a real science, constantly enriched by new evidence.
Forget about the astrologers' charts with their constellations and planets moving in and out of this house or that house. Go into a real observatory and look at the Milky Way, or go out into the country on a moonless night, just lie on your back and gaze up at the stars.
The heart-stopping sight you'd see is 100 billion stars spinning through an expanding universe at a speed of 1 million miles per day. The light from some of the closer stars started its journey at the time of the dinosaurs. You're staring into a deep time machine. And yet, even as science unravels these natural wonders, our society is drawn to the slim pickings of supernatural belief. Half the British population now say they believe in paranormal phenomena. Over 8 million of us have owned up to consulting psychic mediums.
What I want you to do, Richard, for me is just to pull me out 8 of them, please.
Simon Goodfellow claims that, with these cards, he can use his psychic powers to tune in to the spirits of dead people around me.
7, 8.
These voices from the past can apparently give him a glimpse of my future.
Lovely, Richard, thank you. Now, I feel he's giving me the initial G with his name, OK? Now, I feel with this man as well, I feel he was a family member, and I also feel very strongly with something to do with advertising that was in, something to do with newspapers with him as well. Now, I do feel with him as well, he's telling me about changes that are coming up in your life at the moment. I see total changes in how you're working to how you will be working in the future.
The word Simon seems to be fishing for is retirement, the obvious next step for most 60-somethings.
It won't be as hectic and it won't be as active for you, and I do feel you have to grasp that when it...
This could apply to anyone my age, but can Simon back up his more precise statements?
What was that male relative with a G? What was that about you said earlier on?
Right, the male relative with a G, right. I do feel with him, I don't feel he was a family member, but I do feel with him, right, it was some connection.
I thought you said he was a family member,
Did I say that? Did I with a family member?
Yeah, I think you did.
Right, OK.
Maybe.
Let me see if I can feel him here still.
Yes, OK.
Right, OK then. What I feel with him, right, I feel as though there was a lot of things. It was a very strong character. Another feeling he's giving me is it was very regimented as well. And I feel he served in some forces, in some way as well. But can you understand anybody with a military background that was connected to you?
Well, I've got really nobody military in my background at all, and actually nobody beginning with G either.
Right, OK.
Spirit G has rung no bells, but now another voice comes from the ether.
Oh, well, she's giving me the initial E with the name. Now, I do feel with her as well, it's something to do with, I feel, a grandparent, and I want to give you an E-sounding name.
My grandmother had a name beginning with E.
At last, something I can identify with.
E-sounding name.
Yes.
Tell me more about her. I mean,
the lady, I do feel with her as well, she had a lot of cats.
A lot of
cats.
Perhaps not.
She never had a cat. She hated cats, as a matter of fact.
Right.
She liked dogs, but she hated cats.
Well, I can understand. Not everybody, though. What you've got to also remember with this as well, not everybody can relate to everything that a reader will say.
No.
Not everybody. I mean, I've had people like yourself who have...
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Because normally people who come to these events come for a reason, and because they want closure and direction in their life. And also what you've got to think about, Richard, as well, some things are very raw to me.
Psychics may believe they communicate with the dead, but I've seen no evidence for it. My concern is that for some people, this superstitious nonsense can be...
Oi, pessoal, vou parar agora, dar um intervalo, certo? Passou 2 minutos, pelo menos pelo meu computador. O horário aqui no meu computador. Vou dar um intervalo agora, certo? Até as 10h30.
Okay. Você ainda vai apresentar esse vídeo, produção?
Eu vou continuar. Eu queria tudo, mas eu vou continuar. Tá certo? Interrompendo a gravação.